Hello, everyone. I'm Helen Burke, a product manager at Broadcom, part of the Network Observability suite of Broadcom, so a part of Broadcom that some of you might never have heard of. But I spend my days helping to build products to give customers visibility into the end-to-end network. So that's the networks that they do own and the networks that they don't own. And today, I'm going to do two things, hopefully. First, I'm going to try and explain why some of you cloud architects and cloud engineers should be caring about the network observability to begin with. And then I'm going to show some practical ways in which we can actually help with the VCF adoption journey. So Broadcom is quite aware that you've made an investment as part of the VCF 9 transition. And in order to do that, we want to provide a continued partnership and provide advanced services. These advanced services fit into two kind of main categories. One of those categories would be solutions that help with the migration, help with that journey towards adopting VCF 9. And the other side of it is over-the-top services that can augment VCF 9. And actually, Network Observability by Broadcom, over here, is both of those things. But today, I'm going to be focusing on AppNetter, which is part of the Network Observability suite, and how that can help with your adoption of VCF 9. So many of you will already know that VCF provides you with a huge amount of visibility into your software-defined data center and your virtualized environment. But any cloud environment doesn't really live in isolation. There are so many examples of how you either connect to the private cloud. Think about, where are users accessing the applications that are hosted in your private cloud? Are they in offices? Are they in people's homes? All of that connectivity goes over networks that you do and don't own, but affects the performance and perceived perception of your private cloud. And then, actually, how do different cloud environments interact? When you think about things like hybrid cloud environment, you may be hosting workloads on both your private cloud and AWS. And those workloads are traversing networks you do own and networks you don't own, networks that AWS owns. So really, no cloud lives in isolation. And that's where AppNetter comes in. AppNetter extends the visibility that you already have as part of VCF 9 to those networks that you don't own or are not part of your software-defined data center. So one example of these such interactions we can think about is authentication. It's probably the most simple example of how clouds can interact. You may be hosting your applications in your VCF environment, and then you're using an external authentication provider, something like Microsoft Entra. And users start complaining about slowness in the application. Where is that slowness? Is the slowness in the application? Is the slowness in the Microsoft Entra? Is the slowness in the latency between your application and your private cloud and the Azure region that is hosting Microsoft Entra in your case? And how do you quickly determine that? That's where AppNetter sits in this. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. So before I go any further, let's talk a bit about some of the risks in not acknowledging the importance of the network when you're looking at this VCF 9 adoption. Well, my honest answer is, in many cases, it's actually the success of the project. So many times, if something goes wrong, or you come in on a Monday morning and an application is slow, you look at it and you go, I know there was maintenance at the weekend of that application. I got the email on Friday, so it definitely must be the fault of the maintenance that this application is slow. You discount all other factors. We know better. We know that there are many other factors. Other things could have happened at the weekend that you weren't in an email that you got sent on Friday. but what you remember is the change window that you got an email about on Friday. And that loss in confidence, that perceived negative opinion of any transformation project, can actually have serious detrimental impacts on the project. My colleague was working with a customer in France, and they have been moving applications. They've actually been moving applications from AWS back onto on-premise. And they moved one of their first tranche of apps back, and I think, let's say 9 out of 10 apps, all were great. One app had some problems. It was experiencing slowness due to the change in latency. But the perceived perception, even once the operations team resolved the problems, actually derailed the whole project. No longer would app teams want to be involved in the project. In fact, the operations team and the cloud team were having to sit with each application team, go through the process, go through so much more due diligence that it was slowing down their transformation. They were not going to be off AWS in time for their contract because the perceived perception of operation and the confidence in operations had gone down. So this is why you should be caring about network observability, because one little bit of latency change actually was derailing their whole project, not because it actually had a huge impact, but because the perception of that impact was so great. So what can we do at Broadcom to give your users, your clients, more confidence in you? How can we give you some actionable steps? And how can AppNeta help with any transformation, whether that's a cloud transformation or any transformation? Well, I like to think of it as before, during, and after the transformation. Before the transformation is really understand the application. Have a baseline. Know what the current state is, and know what your aims of the transformation are. Are you trying to improve the current state? Or are you trying to maintain the current state for a lower cost, for more compliance, etc.? During, actually put the user experience at the center of the transformation and use it as success metrics. Ensure that the user experience is checked throughout the transformation journey, and don't wait for users to report problems when they come in on a Monday morning. And then, after the transformation, be proactive with the user experience and continuously monitor so that you can get on with your day-to-day operations without spending lots of time in war rooms. And over the next few slides, we'll go into a bit more detail in each of these 3 stages. So what do I mean by baselining application performance? Well, baselining is really understanding expectations of users, and understanding expectations of applications. And so often, application owners don't actually understand the performance of their application in different regions, whether that's different regions nationally or different regions internationally. Humans tend to accept the status quo quite easily. If an application has always taken that long to load, they accept it, but they notice change. So I was working with an insurance customer in the UK, and they were deploying their monitoring before a large transformation. And they noticed, actually, their Bristol office took 50% longer to load almost every internal application than their HQ. They had no idea of this before they put in the monitoring. No user had ever complained. But they now had metrics on the performance of that application. They can use these metrics to define success criteria for the transformation. If the transformation was going to improve that performance, a bonus, but a bonus they could shout about because they had the data to prove it. They knew what the time taken to open that application prior to transformation was. And they had the data to prove that their transformation was going to be successful. But it's not just baselining the user experience. It's also understanding and baselining what are the network conditions that an application expects. Different applications are sensitive to different metrics. So some applications are sensitive to latency. I know medical applications tend to be very sensitive to latency. And then other applications are more sensitive to loss. So by baselining both the application performance and the network performance that that application is running on, you can understand what network conditions would an application deem acceptable and give acceptable performance. And so you know what metrics to strive for in your new environment, and you can show data to any application owner as they go through the transformation. So it's important to look at metrics such as data loss on the network to understand how does that application respond to something like data loss. How does that application respond to high latency? And to understand that before you move forward with your transformation. One example of this is a dashboard from AppNetter that is monitoring our data center to AWS connectivity. Now, down actually is very rare nowadays in networks. There's so much resiliency in both applications and networks. Actual down events are very rare. And we can see that here. Outage time in the last week was 0.1%, and that's a bad week. But slow is far more common. Performance degradation is far more common. And you can see that here with the violated performance, actually 6.9%. And you can also see our worst performing sites. This chart is actually made up of 21 different sites. But actually, most of our performance degradation came from our Denver and Vancouver offices. So having an idea of which sites are worst prior to the migration means that you have that visibility. So now you've got an understanding of the applications, you can move on to the transformation. And this is any kind of transformation. AppNetter is really designed to keep you on track throughout the transformation and moving forward. So I'm probably repeating myself a bit, but it's important to put end-user experience at the center of that transformation. When you move an application onto VCF 9, what is the application performance? How do metrics like AppDex and MOS, mean opinion score, change during that transformation? So AppNetter gives you feedback on the change immediately. So AppNetter is doing continuous active monitoring of the network and application. So you know when you're doing an out-of-hours change, the immediate impact on the application performance from your remote sites around the globe. That immediate knowledge means you don't have to wait for user feedback and when they come in at 9 a.m. You can already understand their impact. And if there's a negative impact, you can roll back the change before the negative impact and prevent that loss in confidence in operations that we talked about earlier in my earlier example. So you can do that. And you can also report on success. So we've actually got a customer who, during their transformation, sent out, I think it was bi-weekly emails on tracking the project markers, tracking the success criteria with data to show users, bringing up the confidence in operations, and also helping application owners to better prepare for the transformation, helping application owners better ready themselves with any actions that were required. So having data for those metrics gives them that ability to send out that data and share it. Number one, shout about what they're doing, shout about their success to the wider organization, and have proof points for that success, rather than, we think it's going really well. So really, the key metric to focus on during the transformation, especially when you're talking about application moves in a cloud environment, would really be AppDex. AppDex is a consolidated metrics that's based on application performance. So it's really easy to understand in the green, orange, red, this application is performing really good. This sort of application is acceptable, but not quite there. This application is not performing well at all. And gives you that immediate feedback. Am I doing the right thing? Should I leave this change in place? Do I need to action something during my change window? So one of my colleagues was working with a healthcare provider. They had actually already moved a lot of their applications up to the cloud, and then they were actually finding they needed to do a bit of a WAN transformation afterwards to help these applications to perform better because of the latency sensitivity of many medical applications. And they were performing this WAN transformation, and it was thousands of sites. But they were performing it weekend by weekend, doing tranches of sites. And as you would expect, it was an out-of-hours change, so at about 4 a.m. And the service provider cut over the network to the new network, and you can immediately see, you can see their brief loss of connectivity due to the change, and you can immediately see a drop in capacity, an increase in data loss, an increase in latency, an increase in round-trip time. That's not what was expected for the change. But they immediately knew that this change wasn't good. They were alerted on top of that. You can see the markers on the graph showing the alerts. And so they were able to quickly actually identify, and I haven't included a screenshot here, but we have hop-by-hop analysis where they could identify, if they didn't already know, that it was an issue in the WAN provider and provide data to their service provider to prove it, which actually helps get the service provider to understand the problem. But they could also roll back the change. So nobody came in and experienced any problem here. They have this data, they sent this data to the service provider and rolled back the change. So they kept confidence in operations, and actually that was part of a much wider project which was incredibly successful. So we've got there. We completed the transformation. But you're not quite done yet. Number one, an important thing to do is talk about success metrics. Use the data that you've collected over the transformation to show the success of your project. You had goals in your transformation, any transformation that is, whether that was cutting cost, whether that was improving performance. And even if you're cutting costs, you need to maintain performance. So being able to have data to show the performance before the transformation and performance after the transformation of those critical apps that you've moved is critical. And that's the first step after transformation. The second step is also to continue to do the testing. The monitoring's already sitting there, and if you continue to let it run, it gives you that continuous visibility into it. And it stops in the future time when you've got your cloud infrastructure up, having those war rooms with finger pointing. They still exist. People still talk to me about war rooms where it's definitely the network problem, it's definitely an app problem, it's definitely the Azure Direct Connects problem, no, AWS Direct Connects problem. It's definitely not our network. It's definitely Azure Express Route. All of those kind of questions. AppNeta provides the data to show whose problem it is, to give you that visibility into that problem, and focus on service quality. How is the service that you are providing to your customers? What is the uptime? Not just the uptime of the cloud, what is the uptime of the actual application sitting on the cloud? That's what users see. It's all well and good to say all our lights are green. If users can't use the apps, is it really up? So another example of a customer that I have today is a financial customer. And they were having problems with Office 365. Actually, they were having problems with all of their apps because all of their apps used authentication through Office 365. And nobody could quite agree what was going wrong. All the app owners were pointing fingers at each other or pointing fingers at Microsoft. In a weird coincidence, Microsoft had announced that there was an OWA hack in the recent days. So everyone was a bit suspicious of that, and nobody was actually sure what the problem is. At the time, they were actually POCing AppNetter. So they spent 3 hours on a call without us, apparently, and then someone on the call got a bit fed up and decided to ring their solution engineer who was running the POC. And they showed the data, and they said, can you see anything in AppNetter? We've had it partially set up as part of the POC. Well, the solution engineer logged into AppNetter and saw this graph. That was the time in which they started seeing the performance problems. You can see immediately that there is basically no available capacity, and there started to be a huge amount of data loss and quite a big jitter at that time. So they looked at the hop-by-hop analysis, and they were able to see that all the problems started around the firewall. So the firewall engineers dug in a bit more. Oh yeah, we did make a change at that time. That exact time that they knew. They had said to start inspecting zip files. Unfortunately, they didn't know that developers were using zip files to upload container images, thus creating overloaded firewalls, thus leaving no available capacity. So changes have an impact. And being able to understand that impact gives you that visibility. So, what have I really covered today? AppNetter can help you to optimize any transformation, including transformations towards VCF 9, by, before your transformation, baselining performance of the network and of the application. During the transformation, putting end-user experience at the center of the transformation, verifying the application performance is at least the same as before the transformation, hopefully better. After the transformation, continuously validating that performance and ensuring that you have continuous metrics on the service quality that you are providing for your customers. And how do we do that? What technology are we using to do that? So we're using continuous web HTTP/API monitoring. So we're running full browser synthetics using Selenium, or if it's not a browser-based application, you can use HTTP/API monitoring to understand that performance and break that performance down into metrics such as DNS response time, server wait time, TCP connection time, SSL connection time. Full understanding of any HTTP, HTTPS application and the transaction. Network visibility. Beyond just BGP, what route is the application taking? And what is the latency? What is the loss? And what is the jitter? And I'm not just talking about latency, loss, and jitter from a ping. Applications don't behave like that. Applications send large bursts of traffic. Applications send jumbo packets. How does your network respond to real application traffic? And then putting those metrics into end-user experience and network performance reporting to give you visibility into that network and user performance in a way that you can understand as operations teams. So, thank you very much for your time. I think that's all I had today. Feel free to give me an email. My email's on the slide there. or feel free to come and visit us in the other room. And have a great rest of your day.